Welcome to Lab Results. We are live on Wednesday, October 27th. Man, this year is flying by fast. We have a great topic tonight that we're going to discuss around domestic violence in our community. One of those things that we don't talk about quite often. It's kind of a dirty little secret a lot of times in all of our lives, but at some point we've all seen it. We've all experienced in some form or fashion. And we want to talk about ways to mitigate it, ways to recognize and kind of work through it as well. So tonight I have a great guest on who is a professional in the field and was in the Black Man Lab on Monday as one of our panelists. And I thought it would be great to bring him on here to give some of his background and to be able to talk about the subject matter at hand. But before we get to that, what we do here at the Black Man Lab and Lab Results now is discuss what got us here first, right? So Black Man Lab was started roughly 4 years ago by four fathers that came together to have a different voice for their sons. We know as fathers quite often our sons, tune us out, but they might listen to an uncle, listen to a godfather, a close friend, whoever. They'll listen to somebody else that might say the exact same thing that we say, but it comes from a different voice, so they'll listen. Well, that's how it started with four fathers. And then what those fathers did was they brought in other voices, other Black men that were professionals in different areas of industry that the young men were interested in. That grew to, prior to the pandemic, of us having over 250 Black men in the same room every week discussing different topic matter. We're back to being live now, but we did not want to stop this virtual piece that we have because it allows us to bring in other voices from, whether it's from other cities, whether it's somebody that might not have been there on Monday, but we want to bring in as many voices as we can so that these topics are heard by our young folks and likewise by folks of a certain age as well. So what we do though is every week we always make sure that we are acknowledging our ancestors, those that came before us. So what we do is a real simple libation. Normally I grew up on the south side of Chicago and a lot of time in the park. We talk about somebody that may no longer be here, may have been having a little sip on something, and we pour out a little liquor for them. That's a form of libation. What we do here, though, is we simply just say their name. We just say a name of an ancestor that meant something to us, an ancestor that would be proud of us being in this space, doing the work that we've been doing. So we always just give a shout out to that one. We'll say one name, and then we let that be our guide for the evening. So I'm going to ask my guest before I introduce him. I'm just going to have to ask him to come on, and at the count of three, just give a name of an ancestor important to you, and then after that we'll say Ashe. So on three, 1, 2, 3. Sylvester
Alicia
Williams.
Cleed.
Ashe.
Ashe.
So we just do that because we want to make sure that we are acknowledging those that came before us and bring them into this space. It's important that we have them in this space as well. So without further ado, well, actually, before I do that even, I want to talk about last night. Last night, Black Man Lab has sponsored the We Need You project. And the We Need You project is where we have allowed our young folks, both folks within the Black Man Lab as well as people that are associated with Black Man Lab, so young ladies as well, to put out a product. And what they did was they took Brother Mowley Davis's book, the We Need You book, and they created art, they created music, they created spoken word, all that was associated with the book. They were all required to read the book and then create from there. And the product that they've put out is absolutely amazing. So we have a 25 track album now from the We Need You project. So last night was the release party for that, and it was amazing. Some of our young folks performed. We had industry professionals there. Across the board, people thought that it was great. And we want to make sure that we are pushing this project and this music out for one reason. The reason is that it shows the ability of our culture to do amazing things when given the opportunity. These young folks, some of them were not music people. They weren't singers. They might not have been rappers, let alone spoken word artists, whatever. But what they did was they dug into their God-given talents and created all of this. And it, again, absolutely amazing. And along with that is a high level of consciousness with everything that was created. So I'm gonna bring my brother Mark Lawson, who is our engineer for everything that we do here at Black Man Lab. He's the one who makes sure that this goes off every week. The Black Lab results goes off every week. And then when we need him in the Black Man Lab for anything technology related, he's our go-to guy. And likewise with the project, he was one of our mentors on it as well. So Mark, if you could jump on and just tell people how they can connect to the We Need You project and the products that were put out from there.
The We Need You project is available on all streaming networks. So just go to your favorite platform, iTunes, Apple Music, Spotify, Amazon Music, and type in Black Man Lab. If you're on your phone, you can follow us on Instagram at Black Man Lab. And for any of the other streaming platforms that you're currently watching us, go directly to the comments and I will drop a link in there as well so that you'll be able to go directly and purchase and hear some of this music from all these wonderful young people.
Thank you so much, Mark. And that's why I brought him on. I knew he'd give a high detail of everything that's available for you all to be able to listen to and see this amazing work that's been done by these young folks. We are so proud at Black Man Lab to have been able to help sponsor this and really support it and put out some meaningful, and this isn't, I'm not trying to degrade what's out there right now as far as music, but this music has meaning. If you hear it, you'll know it, right? So just take a listen, and then share. All we're asking, share and share and share, because it is pretty amazing. Both the spoken word as well as the music are awesome. So wanted to make sure that we talked about that because if we're not pushing what these young people are doing, then God knows what's out there that they'll get involved with. So really proud of that. Anyway, without further ado, I want to bring on my brother Shaka Barrett, who has been a part of the Black Man Lab. He's been in the lab many a time and has supported our work and has been a panelist for us on numerous occasions. And this past Monday, he was a panelist and he was amazing as a panelist on the subject matter that we talked about. So I wanted to make sure that we brought him on here so that we can talk a little deeper. So Brother Shaka, if you give an intro.
Yes. First of all, I really appreciate you all having me on here. I'm a social worker by trade from the DC metro area. Came to Atlanta for school, so I'm an AUC product. I have a bachelor's from Morehouse and a master's from Clark Atlanta. And I have been in the field of social work / psychology for about 20 years. And I think that the longer I do this, the more I start having a personal connection to a lot of the topics. And as you mentioned, being in the Black Man Lab, most of those topics that I was on the panel for, I have a personal connection to. And so the name that I called out during libation was actually the name of a dear friend of mine who tragically lost her life because of domestic violence. Mm-hmm. And that's what really resonated with me, having the opportunity to speak on the topic.
Well, glad to have you here. So sorry to hear about your friend, but it's apropos that's the topic that we talked about, and it's very apropos that you called her name. So thank you for that. And let's talk about, you. So you grew up where?
So I grew up in the DC metro area. Not getting too detailed, but my mom and dad weren't married when I was born. So my dad got custody. So I spent time visiting my mom in DC, and then I grew up in PG County with my dad, my other mom, and my siblings.
Gotcha. I know that area well.
Okay.
Well, first of all, I grew up. Some of my younger years, I grew up in Gaithersburg and Chevy
Okay.
Chase, and
Yeah,
then
Montgomery County.
yeah, and then I wound up coming back to go to Howard. So
Okay.
no DC well. My mom went to law school at Antioch in DC too.
Okay.
So yeah, very, very familiar with the area. So, and then what got you here? What got you into Atlanta?
So one of the founders, Brother Mowley, he actually is a mentor of mine. He taught me how to organize in the community. And so really every time I get an opportunity, I try to be as connected as possible. So I don't remember if he told me about it or I saw something on social media, but that's what originally got me connected to the Black Man Lab. And then there was a topic. I think the first topic that I really advocated to be on the panel was for fathers with daughters, because I have two daughters.
Yeah,
and so that was really near and dear to me. And so after that, it's just any opportunity I can, I do. And as a little side note, I can say that I'm really happy that we're back in person, because, the energy is so different, but at the same time, it's so necessary. And I think you realize that more when you've been away from it. So I'd encourage anybody who has the opportunity to check it out, because it's a really special energy.
Yeah, it's, when I tell people about what the Black Man Lab is, the near impossible thing is to quantify that room.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
It's almost impossible to explain the spirit, the energy, whatever you want to call it, of that room. And it's almost the second that you cross the threshold of the room that you feel it, without anybody saying anything to you. It just is there. And I think what we've tried to provide is a safe, as we say all the time, a safe and sacred place for Black men, which there are those places out there. But in this particular instance, I think the sacred part of it is what shines through. There's this level of kind of unfiltered love that we wind up showing to one another, no matter what walk of life, you're coming from.
Right.
That resonates in that room. So as you said, hey, if you are in the Atlanta area, I beg any man that's out there, just show up one day. Just show up.
Definitely.
Andrew and Walter Young YMCA, 6:30 on Monday, and get yourself fed in a way that you never have before. Just not on top of that, we provide food, but but on top of that, I'm talking about your spirit, feeding your spirit. So let's talk about, what were your thoughts on Monday's conversation? There was a lot. I mean, we run through a lot in a short period of time. But what was your thoughts on everything?
So in thinking about it after the fact, what I realized, which is so appropriate, and it's interesting how, spirit moves, what we were just talking about. I think that because of that sacred space and that energy from being in a safe, sacred space, the biggest thing that I took away from yesterday was how broad domestic violence really is. A lot of times it's dealt with as a male to female situation. But there are a lot of men that have had some serious experiences with domestic violence that has shaped them or caused them to have certain outlooks. And so I think that was the biggest thing that I took away from that experience, as well as the fact that because of the way it's looked at in society, it can create some uncomfortable situations between men and women. And we kind of touched on the whole notion of healthy boundaries. And I think a lot of time those boundaries are pushed both directions in ways that are not taking into consideration, the severity of domestic violence.
Right. And I got that same thing, was that as we were having the conversation, there were all these different, tentacles, if you will, a very touchy subject, right? Across the board, there's nothing, when you talk about domestic violence, there's nothing that's not sensitive. And I was thinking particularly about, the young gentleman talking about a young lady pushing his buttons. They're trying to push his buttons.
I was thinking about that too.
Yeah, and the results of that would have probably happened had he reacted.
Exactly.
Is that he would have been the one that, most likely would have been dealt with by law enforcement.
Exactly.
And for him to have the resonance to figure that out and stand down at a young age, one, it was impressive.
Definitely.
But then two, I think that also further builds his character down the road. When he really looks at that. So those kind of situations happen all the time. I think that there's a lot of good young men that are out there that wind up in those situations and react, as the streets might tell them to react, if you will.
Right.
And then they wind up the ones in the quote unquote hurt locker.
Right.
Because they reacted, even though they weren't the cause of it, So, we know quite often of the men's abuse of women, that's what's always preached about. But when it's the other way around, we don't really talk about that,
And I'm happy you said that, because that's what I was thinking yesterday. And even as you're talking, that, for me as a man, it gave me just a glimpse into the world of what it must feel like as a woman to not have your voice heard,
right?
To have your voice minimized, or to have your experience made small, because, like you said, it happens quite often, but it's very difficult for people to really express what happened. And because it happens to women more, they express more. But then society doesn't always address it, as the serious matter that it is.
Yeah, and
because I remember the gentleman was giving the scenario, and I was stuck. When he was talking about the whole notion of being stuck in a room, the entrance being blocked, and this person instigating you, and I had to just let somebody else answer it, because that's such a real situation. And that's just a real situation. And it's unfortunate that he had to feel helpless like that. And even more so unfortunate that there's so many people, especially women, that feel helpless in situations like that.
Yeah. And in his case, fortunately, he thought it through.
Right. And that, like you said, that was really impressive and remarkable. And I'm happy you said that, because that's what I meant to add, because I was stuck. So I am a professional. I'm in my 40s, and I didn't know how to answer the question. And he, not to take away from his response, because I think a lot of men would not have acted negatively in that situation, but I don't think they would have thought as quickly on their feet like he did to de-escalate the situation.
Yeah. And I think that, as we talk about domestic violence, that's the real question across the board of whatever that domestic violence looks like, is how do we de-escalate? And that question came up a number of times in different ways, but speak to that a little bit of what, from a professional standpoint, what do you see that as?
And so one of the things that we talked about last night was the notion of, well, I'll start at the quote unquote core of it, which is the love component. The whole idea of being connected to yourself as a human, and being able to see the humanity in somebody else so that you act accordingly based in love. And then we talked about thinking. A lot of times, one of the other panelists, Dr. White, he was much more eloquent in how he expressed it. But the whole idea of how our brain acts when we're in these situations, and really the importance of thinking before you act, and not acting out of anger, because that oftentimes is what happens in those domestic situations. It's I use one of his terms, but turned it into a domestic violence situation, but the post-decision epiphany, right? Where after the fact, we realize, oh man, I made a mistake. But because of the sensitivity of the situation, literally somebody could be dead now, or somebody's world is rocked in such a traumatic way because somebody didn't take the time to think. And so I think with the young kids that were in there, we were really trying to emphasize the importance of thinking. And then before that, of doing the work that you need to do to give yourself the tools, whether it's counseling, therapy, anger management classes, giving yourself the tools to acknowledge your own challenges so that you can be better prepared when somebody triggers you or a situation triggers you.
Yeah. And there were a couple of things there that, I think help with, as you think through, we talked about thinking about if it's your daughter or your mother, in that situation, and, putting it in that perspective, because that's easy for all of us for the most part to do. You and I both have daughters, obviously having mothers, those are the kind of things that make you pause when it comes to those escalating situations, like with a woman, as a man to a woman. The other one, I think, and I don't know that it was said, but it was said, kind of inadvertently, is it's important, I think, for us to think with the end in mind, right? In everything that we do, but particularly as it is in relationships, when you think about what's going to happen, 4 steps down the road if I behave a certain way. Right. Obviously, as we talk about domestic violence, those steps down the road, if you start here at domestic violence, those steps down the road are going to go really bad, for somebody, whether it's you or the person that you're dealing with. So I think if we kind of have to change and switch our thought processes to not be in a place of constant reaction versus a place to stop, think about how this could end. So I was thinking all these things were going on as you guys were talking on the panel. And I just wanted to add
to what you're saying, because we kind of got off on a really powerful space because one of the brothers was sharing about his upbringing and how he never had a personal experience with domestic violence where he was, it happened to him or he perpetrated on somebody else, but how he grew up in a home where he saw that. And I think that, to your point of, that whole being proactive, realizing that a lot of times if you have not learned better, more healthy or appropriate coping skills, then that's what you resort to. Or, taking into consideration that as men, we are socialized in a way that doesn't always allow us to learn healthy ways to express our emotions. And that's something that I've done a lot of work with kids and adults. And it really is, it's very fascinating, sincerely, how many people don't grow up with those, what we would consider to be simple coping mechanisms. How many people really resort to some level of violence or anger as their first response to even the smallest trigger. And so I think that's something to be discussed, because you and I had a conversation afterwards. And like we mentioned, it's so layered when it comes to this topic of domestic violence. And so, just trying to get those young people to really understand the importance of controlling yourself first, because that's really where it starts.
Yeah, and I think seeing, when you're and having known some folks that have grown up in homes that domestic violence was prevalent, and knowing those guys now, right, and knowing that they're so far from that, right? Those kind of things would never, it would never enter my mind, because my mom and dad are still together after 60 years.
Oh, wow.
My dad ain't never thought about, he's never thought about laying hands on, as far as I know, laying hands on my mother. My mom was a fireball, but he never, has never come into picture. So it's never come in my mind to do that, or my brother's mind to do that. But those that grew up in a home like that, you may normalize that.
Exactly.
But the guys that I know that did grow up in homes like that, they were fortunate enough to have some other role models or see other families that did not have that. And so in their mind, they're like, I'm never going to do that, right? What do you think is for those that don't have that though, like, so young folks that grow up and don't have any outlets, of seeing what a good family dynamic looks like, their friends' families are doing the same thing, whatever. What do you think is a means of coping? What do you think are how do we further connect them? Because that's what I want to do. I want to make sure that yeah.
And so I think that's a great question. And it goes back to, like we mentioned earlier, about it being layered, because that's where the tools and resources necessary have to be available. That's the importance of, for example, the Black Man Lab, having a space that people can have these honest conversations and dialogues. Having organizations that work with kids make this a priority to speak about. A lot of times, having managed a program, I used to manage a recovery support program for Fulton County. And when you have the ability to control what those kids are being exposed to, and have the right knowledge, and skill set, then you can create a program where you can really address the different root causes, where we can start, having, I don't want to keep sounding like I'm repeating myself, but it really is creating opportunity and access to therapy, to anger management groups, teaching kids how to start recognizing their feelings and their emotions at a young age, taking away the stigma of anger, of frustration, because these are natural emotions. And so the goal is learning how to manage them as opposed to acting like they don't happen. Creating safe spaces, again, like we mentioned, where people can have real dialogues. As an individual, being somebody who is self-aware within themselves, that you can kind of create your own safe space for people. Because part of why I'm in the field that I'm in is because it seems like that's what I was called to do. People have always wanted to tell me what's going on with them. People have always sought me out for advice or help in situations. And so I naturally gravitated towards mental health, psychology, social work. But there's some benefit to that, because people reach out to you and tell you their situations. And so I think part of it is creating an infrastructure, mental health professionals being more intentional about creating programs for these kids, for these men, that are proactive, as you mentioned earlier, as opposed to reactive. A lot of Black men get told to go to anger management after they're part of the judicial system, right? Well, why not have that available beforehand? And then how do you make that accessible and make individuals aware that that's important? And then I think, especially with a lot of other situations in our community, it's not sweeping things under the rug anymore. Because so many things get, what's going on, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But, you're not supposed to say anything, or am I making sense?
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
And so I think, and like I said before, it's so layered. I don't think there's necessarily one specific answer outside of, making the conversation different. This happens. It's not healthy. What can we do about it? As opposed to, when it happens, saying, oh, yeah, that shouldn't happen. It does happen.
And let me jump in on you there. I think that's important as it relates to you talking about the layers, right? When you said it happens. Let's talk about what the it's are, because not everybody recognizes things as domestic violence.
Right.
So, talk about that. Talk about what are things that are considered domestic violence and what that picture can look like.
I'm so happy you said that, because there was a powerful question that was asked by a young man yesterday, because we oftentimes really focus on the physical part of domestic violence.
Right.
But there's different forms of abuse. So you have verbal abuse, you have emotional abuse, you have mental abuse, and then of course you have physical abuse. I think, as with most other things, physical abuse probably gets the most attention because it's the most obvious, right? So if I came into the Black Man Lab with a black eye, clearly somebody's going to ask me what happened. And if I feel comfortable in sharing, then they're going to know. But there are other forms of abuse. And so educating ourselves and educating our community on those forms of abuse, which oftentimes we don't consider to be abuse. I know for myself, I'm married for the second time now. And so the first time when I was married, I realized after the divorce that I had experienced emotional abuse. And a lot of people have probably experienced emotional abuse and don't even realize that they've experienced emotional abuse. And that's the type of abuse that starts having, it's kind of mental, along with, starts impacting the way you think about yourself, how you feel about yourself. There are a lot of Black men that are acting out because of sexual abuse. And so to give you an example, I actually had a client today that was thrown on my schedule, not today, yesterday, I'm sorry. They were put on my schedule last minute. And so I prepped for him, I spoke to him, and he was really angry. It's a Black man. And he wouldn't outright say it, but the majority of his anger was because he had spent a lot of time incarcerated, and something about the notion of him being perceived or seen as a homosexual triggered him, right? And so the reason why I say that is because clearly somebody was saying something to him, because he kept referring to, oh, they're saying this or they're saying that. That's a form of abuse. We look at it as, I don't know what they call it now, but just, fellas do that. We kind of joke with each other and, poke fun at each other.
Sure.
But part of, being more aware if you're really pushing somebody's buttons for real. Because then, you go into the layer of, if you are pushing their button and they get upset, if it's not a healthy space, then now they're going to get made fun of even more, right? Like, oh, look at you acting this or you. And so I think that a lot of it is really being more in tune with, it's just us having to be more in tune with what abuse is, that it can be emotional, that it can just be verbal. The example that the young man gave yesterday, that was verbal abuse. Here you are berating his manhood, his humanity, with the intention of trying to provoke him. And we do that to each other as men. We do that to women. And so, like we said, the emotional part, of course, the physical part, and then, one of the hardest ones to talk about, even as a professional, is the sexual part. Because there are a lot of people who have experienced sexual abuse, which can be a form of domestic violence. We think of it a lot of times with women, but I think of the movie Antoine Fisher and how that relative was sexually abusing him. That was a form of domestic violence. And so just, those kind of things we don't often think about. So I think it's really just understanding that it's much more than just a physical component. That really, if any kind of abuse is happening in a domestic context, then that can be seen as domestic violence, especially if it's being done in a way to control or manipulate an individual.
Yeah, and I think though, with sexual abuse and domestic violence, that really gets swept under the rug. Nobody wants to talk about it, right?
Right.
And I know someone that it was a little different. It wasn't family, but it was in the church.
Right.
And another friend of mine, we're talking with him, and we're joking around about, a priest that had been defrocked because of, some sexual violence. And so as we're joking around, our other associate there, he gets, heated, upset to the point that he doggone near looks like he's about to cry and walks off. It's like, I don't want to talk about that MF, and it walks off. And it was almost obvious. It was like, oh man, do you think that, that occurred with him? Well, my other buddy winds up asking, talking to him about it. And he's like, his reaction was, I don't want to talk about it. Right. So it tells you something happened, right? But
exactly.
That's the nature of, when it comes to sexual abuse that, folks are just going to not talk about it. And we see that in families and stuff all the time. But there's got to be a means of mitigating that and having those conversations. 'Cause to your point, it'll bubble up in a different way, later on. So,
Right.
as far as on Monday, what do you think was the most prevalent or most expressive question that you heard there on the panel?
I think that for me, we already talked about it. It was the question that the young man asked where he was trying to get a better clarity on what constituted domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I think that was the question that I choose is because a lot of times we have conversations, but we don't know fully what we're talking about, if that makes any sense. And so you can't really address a problem or analyze something until you define what it is.
Yeah.
And so, to realize that there are a lot of young folks and older folks, because even I had to think about that because we are so socialized to think of domestic violence as physical violence, primarily from a man to a woman. And so what we just talked about a second ago, because a lot of times the physical is like I mentioned earlier, it's the most obvious, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the root or that is the beginning or the foundation. And so then, just like with the criminal justice system, they come into contact with somebody because of a physical altercation. Now that person has to take anger management or they have to see a therapist. And then now you start getting to the root of what really caused the situation, which is why earlier we were talking about the importance of learning, getting those resources so you can learn your triggers, learn healthy coping mechanisms, learn how to reframe, the conversation you're having with yourself. Because we touched on that a little bit on Monday, the conversation that you have with yourself, somebody triggered you. And so now you're having this dialogue with yourself about, oh, they trying me or blah, blah, blah. I got to prove this. I got to show that. And so that's part of what contributes to those situations escalating as well. I do want to add to the question that you asked earlier. I also think that all levels of engagement need to be properly trained because we live in such a punitive society that when you face the consequence, a lot of times it's just criminal, right? Mm-hmm. There's nobody who's trying to break down the nuances of the situation. And so I think that the more people, again, are educated, the more people are provided with de-escalation tools for themselves as well as for situations. And then I think with this topic of domestic violence, this is the Black Man Lab. So I think there is a level of accountability that we as men need to take. And I say that very seriously. Like we need to call up those brothers that we know, like somebody said, I saw something on social media and it was talking about how there's all these people who are all these situations of domestic violence going on, yet no man will say that they know somebody who did it. Mm. You know what I'm saying? Mm. And it was more so talked about when it comes to the topic of rape. But if you were statistically to look up how many incidents of domestic violence are reported, but how many men say, oh yeah, I know somebody who did that.
Right.
But clearly we have to know somebody who did that. Clearly. And so, one of the things I think you and I were talking about afterwards is this importance of, men need to call other men to task. Period.
Absolutely.
Because the victim, whether male or female, has to feel safe. And so I'm going to just share a quick story. An individual was staying with me and they came back to the house as a woman. She came back to the house and she clearly had been beaten on. That whole situation went a certain way because my initial instinct was to recognize the situation and address it. And so now this person felt safe. This person felt seen, even though they didn't necessarily want to go through with it, because they had advocates and people who were encouraging and supporting them. they were able to do what was necessary. And I think a lot of times that doesn't happen, especially as we mentioned before with men who probably, and I don't know the statistics behind this, but most of the time with men, it's probably because the man doesn't tell anybody.
Right.
Right. And so, yeah, you know, and I know we're kind of dancing around it a little bit in terms of, you know, not really directly some of these questions that you're asking. But because it's so, there's so many different moving parts, you know, that go along with it. And you know, but that's one thing I do think is very important is that people in general, you know, you see these videos and it's domestic violence going on, you know, World Star and YouTube. And, and nobody's saying anything. Right. And it's literally like, you know, like I've literally started challenging myself now on Instagram to report the video. I don't even care who posts it. Because when you perpetuate it like it's a spectator sport, then you create, you know, you create a situation where people become audience members as opposed to active participants.
Exactly. You just make it an environment that's actually, you know, for lack of a better term, inviting it, right?
Right.
Because if some young folks are seeing that and then say, you know, oh, I can get, you know, 1,000 likes for that, and there you have it. You know what I mean? There was a question that was out there, and maybe you can address this a little bit, of a family member that was known to be in a domestic violence situation.
Right.
How to address that. Talk about that a little bit, because you touched on a little bit there, you know, where you said accountability and you have to say something. But sometimes in families, there's so many dynamics. You know, it might be actually my cousin, you know, laying hands on his wife or his girlfriend. Right. You know, so that makes it weird because it's my cousin. But I'm close to that young lady too, because she's been part of the family. And, you know, I don't know what to do. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, I think that goes back to what we talked about earlier in terms of the importance of speaking up, not just being a spectator, but actually being an active participant. And so it's, you know, I'm sure I will honestly say that I don't know what the textbooks say, but what I do know from experience is that you have to address it head on. One of the things that makes domestic violence so difficult is it's so uncomfortable. And I think that we have to start making ourselves comfortable in that uncomfortable topic. And so, you know, having a conversation where, you know, the reason again that I referred to the friend of mine that I lost is because with the training and the experience that I have in life now, there are times that I feel bad because I feel like I could have really intervened differently in that situation. And so when it happened again, I was much more intentional to say, you know, these are your options. These are potential resources, but let's look at what ultimately could happen. And I know people don't like to always say, oh, you know, that's worst case scenario, but that's what you have to really think about. I had a friend of mine call me up within the last month, and she just left a domestic violence situation. The boyfriend is a police officer. She got a temporary restraining order against him. And literally, first she didn't know what to do. And so I talked to my uncle, who was a retired police officer. But then they lifted the temporary restraining order because they said, well, if this had really been happening, why didn't you report it before? Right. And so now she felt invisible. She felt helpless. She felt unseen. And so, you know, it really is about addressing that person with the understanding that I love you. And I'm telling you this because you are important to me. But unfortunately, you can't make people more important to them than they make themselves important. Right. But I think when you start doing that, then it opens up the realm of, oh, I didn't think about it this way. But it also reminds them that they're not by themselves. And so to your question, one thing specifically is let that person know that they're not alone. I see what happens. I see you. I see how it impacts you. And it impacts me. And it's important to me that you get the assistance or the help or whatever it is that you need. Because I think that makes a difference, because now, that person feels seen, and really press on them about the importance of addressing it. One of the things that I realized helped the friend that I mentioned was getting her to understand that your voice and speaking on it and doing something about it is not just so you hope something happens. It's because it helps you reclaim your power, right? So you're no longer sitting in the situation in silence. You're no longer just dealing with it as just the status quo. You are addressing it for yourself as a problem. And I mention it that way because, unfortunately, there are a lot of situations where, depending on who that man is, if it's a male-female situation or woman, they have a certain level of influence in the community that absolves them of real consequences. And so your power is, you said no, you said not anymore, and you removed yourself from the situation. And so that empowerment, that recognition of that person's humanity and the experience, and doing it in a way that shows you love them and that there's a severity to the situation. I think those are some things that can really help in that dynamic. And then if you want to go a step further, like we mentioned earlier, if that man is comfortable, confront the person. Now, of course, that's always a sticky situation, but it can always be done in a way that basically says, so many things came to my mind during the panel. I remember my sister, she was dating a football player, and she came to visit me in Atlanta. This is when she was in college, and I could tell something was wrong, and I don't remember how it came to fruition. I mean, how it came to me, but basically she shared that this person had put his hands on her a couple of times. And so, I mean, you've seen me in person. I ain't the biggest person in the world. I was in a little bit better shape back then. And I didn't really know what to do. All I did was call this person up, and I made it very clear to him that he will never put his hands on my sister again. And of course, he wanted to call back and this, that, and the third. And the last thing I remember saying to him is, this is my address. This is my phone number. You're a professional football player. You have disposable income. Let me know what terminal of Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport you're going to be at, and I will meet you there, and we can finish this conversation. And so, again, I don't know what would have happened if he had shown up, and I don't even know if the experts say that's what you're supposed to do. But I was so serious, and he knew I was serious. And beyond that, my sister saw I was serious. The victim saw that I was serious. She knew that somebody was willing to go to action on her behalf to ensure that that did not happen again. And I think that's where a lot of our systems fail domestic violence victims. They don't validate their humanity or make it clear that we are willing to go to this length to ensure that you are safe. And I think that's where the importance of intervening really has its power.
I think that, you said something there that's important. And that is when we hear of or know of, it's easy for us when it's family, right? So like, right. My daughters know if
that's an excellent point. Yeah.
When my daughters know, be real particular if you're gonna tell me about something like that going, because there's no off button. There's no off button. And the other thing that I've come to realize, 9 times out of 10, any man that's laying his hands on a woman is a coward, right?
Yes.
And when they get called to the carpet by another man, they act cowardly. I've experienced that in my own life. And because I have very little tolerance for that. Again, just because of how I was raised. But I think that, like I said, it's really easy when it's family, particularly if it was your daughters. That's real easy to know how you're going to react to it. But I think a lot of times what we do as a community is those things happen. We know they happen. And we don't hold that other man who, for all practical purposes is a coward. We don't hold him accountable, to do what you were talking about. Right.
Right.
And that guy, be a pro football player or not, reacted the way that he did with you because of who he really is, you know?
Right.
Because no real man is doing that. You know what I mean?
Right.
No real man is doing that. And that's not to, I'm not trying to say what a real man is, but I'll say this and be very clear. A real man doesn't need to put his hands on a woman, period.
Right.
You know,
Right.
just don't. There's no, you know, a real man can walk away, you know.
Right.
So I think that it's important that we as a community start to make those decisions and make those actions happen where we respond when we see, you know, a brother behaving in that kind of a character, that we say,
Right.
"Nah, man, you don't do it. That ain't gonna happen no more. And if it does, there's consequences."
And so, to your point, there was a situation that I remember. I wasn't a part of it, but I remember where there was a gentleman who had been in a situation where other brothers called him to task, and the energy was so different. And again, I just happened to notice it passing by. These are individuals that I was familiar with, but to your point, it made a difference. Because when you are confronted by an energy similar to yours, you're going to respond a little differently. But I think the biggest thing that you said that was so important was the notion that, you know, we have to start looking at the situation as one big family, right? And so as one big family, if you know something, I mean, it happens, there are plenty of times, and I'll even admit myself that there are numerous times, I won't say numerous, but there are a lot of times where looking back, I could have intervened in situations, but I didn't because I was on the bus and, you know, that's none of my business. Or, and intervening doesn't always have to be literally getting up into the middle of it, right? It could be just calling attention to it. Hey, you know what I'm saying? You don't need to be putting your hands on her like that. It could be, you know, I see what's happening. I'm about to call the police. There are different ways that you can intervene. You could just call the police, like, hey, there's a situation going on. 2 people, this man is putting his hands on this woman. And I know, as a little side note, that, you know, there's a whole nother layer to that when it comes to being Black in America and calling the police. But it's just making sure that you do something. Even if you go after the fact to the, you know, the neighbor and say, hey, I heard what happened. Is there something that I can do? Can I help you in any way? Here's some resources, or here's, you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
But I think, to your point, because that's an excellent example that you gave, that we have to be more intentional about making this a problem that needs to be addressed, as opposed to situations that we deal with on a as needed basis.
Yeah, absolutely. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about community building. That's
Right.
what Black Man Lab's about, and so many other
Right.
organizations that are out there are about. And you know, part of that is healing our past, right? We have a ton in our past as a Black community that has caused harm to us in a variety of ways, and that manifests in different ways. As we talk about domestic violence, that's one of the ways that things manifest, you know. And the only way that we're going to heal that is as a collective, and being unapologetic about loving our community, right? And being able to step out and say, you know, no, that ain't right. You know, we have to be able to say that ain't right amongst ourselves, so somebody else isn't coming in and say that ain't right, and then not on top of that, it ain't right, and your ass is in jail. You know? Because we don't need nobody else going to jail if you know, we can avoid it from our communities. I wanted to touch on one thing. Brother Michael Wright, who is listening in, who is a big part of Black Man Lab and comes every week, he put a text, sent a text in our stream, and he said, I think we can say that no real person, human, brother, sister, puts their hands on someone they're in a relationship with. And likewise, a man should never be uninvolved when a woman is being abused. And I completely agree with what Michael said.
I think that's a wonderful way to say it. I like that, the uninvolved. Like,
we should never be uninvolved. So those are good words from brother Brother Wright. I love that man. He comes every time to the Black
Okay.
Man Labs. Comes with great spirit. So I appreciate him stepping in there. And by the way, Brother Ken Love said, Shaka. He gave you a shout out on there.
Hey, Brother Ken Love, and I actually look forward to putting a face to the name of Brother Wright as well.
Yeah, you've seen him in there before. Big fella.
I don't ever remember names, but I always remember faces, and I'm almost positive. As soon as I saw him, he would say, "Hey, this is me." I would say it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He's that guy. So, man, look, Shaka, we are already up against the clock here, man. I told you this goes fast. But one of the things that we do here every week before we end with our guests is we always talk about habits, rituals, and disciplines. The things that you do on a daily basis that help you to move and get through life and get your job done however you need to get it done as it relates to your professional life as well as your personal life. So we're going to ask you, what are your habits, rituals, and disciplines that you do on a daily basis, brother?
So first, I want to thank the Black Man Lab because this space is part of why I have been way more intentional with doing this. And so my daily routine, habit, and ritual is I read my Bible. I read several books that go with the Bible, just little devotionals. I try to read an inspirational book. And then I also send out good morning messages to people. And I do that every morning. And I literally find that when I do it correctly, my whole day is better. And then on the back end, what I do is I make it a point to read. And so I read several books at a time, like a chapter out of each. And it's usually a book for fun, a book for professional growth, a book for personal growth, and then some kind of book to help me learn some more about myself and my history. And so those are my habits, rituals, and routines. And I will say that the morning texts are probably my favorite because even though I just do them, because I feel, appreciation is a big deal to me. And so that's why I do them, but it matters to other people. And so I say that to say, whether it's a text or not, the importance of your habits, rituals, and routines is they allow you to be grounded enough so that you can do what you need to do during the day that you don't even realize other people need. But if you're not doing your work first, then you might not be doing the work you were supposed to do that day. And so I just wanted to add that.
That's great stuff, man. So when you say your morning message, you just sending out something, an inspirational word in the morning?
Oh man, it could be a happy Tuesday. There's some of my Morehouse brothers, they make fun of me because it's like, thank you for telling me the day of the week. Sometimes it's a little, it could be motivational. It might be a scripture. It's really anything, whatever my spirit is moved to do after doing the other part of my routine, then that's what I try to do. And I find that because of my routine, I'm more connected to myself, which means I'm more able to hear what I need to do. And I feel like it has much more of an impact. Because sometimes I send a message and I didn't even realize that person needed it.
Yeah.
And again, I just want to keep pointing out that, going even back to the topic that we were just talking about, you don't know how powerful your action can be for that person. And that's why your action is so important, because you can literally save somebody's life, especially when it comes to domestic violence, by doing nothing other than recognizing their humanity and honoring it.
Yeah. It's interesting that, to your point, I used to, and I probably should get back to it, but I just haven't been in the same kind of a professional space. Or a company I used to work for, I was director of sales for them. What I would do every day is send out email with an inspirational story, message, something that I might have come up with, but it was always attached at the end of it, attached to a song. So it was like I was a little DJ, I had a story and then a song attached to it. And so it brought a smile to everybody's face, and it was always bringing us, more importantly, I shouldn't say more importantly, but just as important, it was food for myself.
Exactly.
That, as I did it, when I hit send, that I'd have a smile on my face, and it kind of launched me into my day, and then throughout the day, different people would reach out to me and, they'd be like, boss, that was a great one this morning or whatever, and those kind of things keep you going. And then at the same time, there were plenty of times that, I had somebody that would say, man, that was exactly what I needed today.
Yeah.
Your word is what I needed, So I completely get that and love that. So Brother Michael Wright, he sent his phone number. He wants you to put him in on your text.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So,
okay.
I'll make sure I get that to you. So, brother, what were you gonna say?
Oh, no, I said I appreciate that.
Yeah. He's a great brother too. So we're gonna end here, man, with the same way that we end in the lab, bro. And that is going to be just kind of we're virtual, so we're gonna lock our arms like this. I know you. Yeah, there you go. And then just repeat after me, my man. I'm a link in this chain.
I'm a link in this chain.
And it won't break here.
And it won't break here.
I'm a link in this chain.
I'm a link in this chain.
And it won't break here.
And it won't break here.
We are links in this chain.
We are links in this chain.
And we won't break here.
And we won't break here.
I should. Thank you again, brother. I appreciate you.
Man. No
Hope
problem.
to see you again.
Definitely.
On Mondays, whenever you can get there, man. We love you in the space, brother.
Definitely. Love being there. I appreciate you. And thanks a lot, man.
All right, partner. We'll talk to you soon.
Every time we speak, I feel this melody attack.